Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. It's just gone 1 o'clock, so I'm just going to give everyone a chance to join. Do feel free to drop into the Q&A box and say hi. We've disabled the chat feature as we've discovered it can cause problems for some people using screen readers. So I'm just going to leave it a few moments for more people to arrive and then we'll get started. I see lots of you joining up. Okay, so I can see the numbers jumping up. So I think we'll officially start the webinar now. So hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar, which is called Employee Support and Adjustments in the Age of COVID. My name is Annie Mannion and I'll be running you through today's session. So just to go through a few bits of housekeeping, we do have live captions on the webinar provided by MyClearText. So thank you, Elaine, who's doing those in the background. You can turn on the captions using the closed caption option on the control panel. And additional captions are also available at streamtext.net/player?event=AbilityNet. And you can find slides available on our website at abilitynet.org.uk/adjustments-webinar. And if you have any technical issues or you need to leave early, don't worry, you'll receive an email with the recording, the transcript and the slides very soon. So also, just depending on how you joined the webinar, you'll find a Q&A window, but if you'd like to ask the speakers any questions, if you could drop those in the Q&A area and we'll address those later on or after today's session on the website. And then we also have a feedback form that you'll be directed to at the end. So please do complete that. And also please do sign up to our newsletter at /newsletter. So just a bit of information for those of you who aren't yet familiar with AbilityNet. We support people of any age living with any disability or impairment to use technology to achieve their goals at home, at work and in education. And so we do this by providing specialist advice, services, free information resources like this webinar. And I'll share a little more about our services at the end. Okay, great. So just to introduce today's session, joining us today, we have Mairead Comerford, who is Head of HR at AbilityNet, and also Adam Tweed, who's Innovation Consultant for Education and Workplace at AbilityNet. And they'll be discussing reasonable adjustments in the workplace during COVID-19 in particular, and also assistive technology that can help. And then we also have Lena Chohan, who is Group Ergonomic, Musculoskeletal and Wellbeing Specialist at BT Group. And she'll be highlighting how BT Group focused on workstations when many of its employees were working from home at the start of the pandemic. And then at the end, we'll have a short Q&A where you can pose your questions to the panel. So just before Mairead kicks off today's webinar content, I'm just going to start with the poll. So just going to launch the poll. So just so we can have a bit more understanding about your background with the topic, can you tell us what's your experience of reasonable adjustments? Do you have none at all? I'm looking forward to learning more. I've requested and received reasonable adjustments. I help arrange reasonable adjustments for colleagues, or I'm trying to improve reasonable adjustments at my organisation. So I'm just going to leave it a bit of time for everybody that wants to vote. Okay, numbers going up. Okay, just going to end the poll now. So the last few answers. Okay. And sharing the results, we have at the top, I am trying to improve reasonable adjustments at my organisation. And then followed by, I help arrange reasonable adjustments for colleagues. So that was 32 and then 30%. And then 19% I have requested or received reasonable adjustments. And then 18% are say none at all, and I'm looking forward to learning more. So hopefully we'll be able to provide you with some useful pointers to take away. Without further ado, I'll pass over to Mairead to share her best practice advice about reasonable adjustments.
Okay, good afternoon all. I'll be spending about 10 minutes with you looking at three things in particular. What are reasonable adjustments, what you could be put in place as an organisation, and what we do here at AbilityNet. Okay, so reasonable adjustments. So they're a requirement by law under the Equality Act 2010, which states that employers have a duty to make reasonable adjustments for disabled people. This duty placed on organisations is then to take active steps to place their disabled staff on an equal footing with non-disabled individuals, but it also applies for those applying for jobs. So the purpose of the duty is to put in place adjustments that are reasonable to the organisation to introduce and have the effect of addressing the disadvantage faced by the disabled employee or job applicant. So what workplace requirements can be adjusted? So the duty to make reasonable adjustments exists really in relation to three different requirements, and I'm going to lay those out for you. So number one, it's a provision, criterion, or practice of the organisation. So this looks at the way the organisation is run through such things as their policies, their rules, internal practices. So it may include recruitment practices, criteria that are applied during a promotion exercise, or workplace policies, for example, desk location, allocation of car parking spaces, working time, and absence management. The second one is a physical feature in the workplace, and this applies to all parts of the workplace. So it can include doors, windows, desks, canteen, and even if you've got an on-site gym. So they all have to be taken into consideration with regards to reasonable adjustments. And the third one is the provision of auxiliary aid or service, and that covers equipment for disabled individuals. So it can be things like an adjustable mouse, keyboard, or an assistance for an individual such as a support worker or a sign language interpreter. So if we look at who it applies to, this duty on organisation, it's to make reasonable adjustments. It covers a wide range of individuals, and so it's job applicants, something to remember, all employees, and that's part-time, fixed term, temporary contracts, anybody that's regarded as a worker, and also agency staff. Therefore, for us as employers, we need to understand when the duty arises and how to put this into effect to ensure we're not failing to meet those reasonable adjustment obligations. So if we look at the duty, when does it apply? It applies when, as an employer, we know an individual is disabled, or where we are reasonably expected to know when an individual is disabled. So that can be through things like employee discussions, return to work, fit notes you've seen from a GP, long-term sickness, employee having difficulty undertaking a particular duty. It's worth remembering that asking an individual whether they're disabled or not could potentially lead to claims that an organisation has a discriminatory culture. So the best way to do this is to ask the individual if any reasonable adjustments need to be made. And this word we keep using, reasonable, what does that mean? So it's an objective test, but there are a number of factors that we can consider as employers, and that is how effective the adjustment is at removing or reducing the disadvantage, how much the adjustment will cost to introduce it and any future costs, the size and resources available to the organisation, and also where there is any financial support available to make that adjustment. So if we could just move on to slide 2, please. So on this one, I'm going to look at what you can do and what we do at AbilityNet. So One of the things I think that you could do is have an internal adjustment process, and that will give good guidance then to managers, staff, of what's in place, which can then help to create an environment and recruitment process where everybody feels safe and comfortable to talk about disability. So as I said earlier, nobody has to tell their employer, potential employer, they're disabled. You can ask an employer or job applicant about their disability if you need information to keep to the law. So things such as health and safety risks, avoid disability discrimination, or even to monitor the number of disabled people in your organisation. So hold a meeting to discuss how their health impacts their work, ask if they have any suggested amendments, and remember to use appropriate language, because language can affect how people feel. And each individual will have their own preferences, so they might refer to themselves as I'm disabled, I have a disability. So understand their preferences, and there's a very good guidance on the government side called Inclusive Language Guidance, which is worth a read. Remember to keep things confidential, unless the person is happy for it to be shared. And if they do agree for that to be shared, you need to discuss with them what they want to be shared, who's it to be shared with, and how. So do they want to share, or do they want their line manager to share? And just bear in mind that confidentiality may not be possible or limited in some circumstances. For example, if someone has a support worker at work. The other thing that's quite useful to do if they're happy with that is sharing experiences with others. And that's if the person feels comfortable with this. And this could be done at staff induction. It could be done with articles on the internet, which we've done at AbilityNet, which have worked really well, and especially during Mental Health Awareness Week. And it really does help to create an open, inclusive and accessible work environment. So at AbilityNet, as a disability charity and a disability competent leader, we work to have a culture of open, inclusive and accessible work environment. So from recruitment, we will highlight that we're a disability competent leader. And on our adverts, we talk about reasonable adjustments, and we use a Clear Talents recruitment tool, which is an optional tool where somebody applying will complete a questionnaire to let us know any reasonable adjustments that they require to go through the process. And we look at that, and then we'll amend our processes to assist that candidate for them to perform at their best. And I honestly can't remember a time when we haven't amended the process to help someone to perform at their best. At induction, then, when somebody joins us, we use Clear Talent at Work questionnaire. Now, this is a confidential tool. They talk about how best they work, any adjustments required, and this is shared with their line manager and HR, or just HR if they prefer. And from this, a meeting takes place, and what is required is discussed, and possibly a workplace assessment is required. So what's nice about the Clear Talent at Work is that they don't have to talk about it straight away. They can do it through the tool and have that conversation with their line manager. I mentioned earlier about what does reasonable mean, and if there's any support available. It's important to know, for us all to know as employers, about the government's Access to Work grant, and that's available to help people stay in work if they have a physical or mental condition or disability. And this grant helps to pay for practical support, so with their equipment, advice about managing their mental health at work, and money to pay for communication support at interviews. It's not something that the employer can apply for. It's done by the individual. And they can apply for the grant even when they're going through a job offer's been made and for any reasonable adjustments. And this is covered, the grant is covered depending on the size of the organisation and the individual's needs. I think some people don't realise, some people think it's just for equipment, but it can be used for travel costs. So I've known someone who, due to their disability, they can't travel long distances. So Access to Work pays for them to stay over at a hotel if they're going on a business meeting and it's over 2 hours away. It can pay for assistive technology, for example, Genius Within, coaching and assessment tool for neurodiverse individuals, and for things like support workers. And I think I always think of access to work as the government's best kept secret, but it's something that all employers should be aware of, especially when you're looking at the financial side of things being available that employers can use. So that's worth looking at the government site and reading up about that. And I've put a link in about our access to work tool. And this tends to pay for the things that cost, like I said, Genius Within, Dragon Speak-In tool. But I'll pass over to my colleague Adam, who will talk you through about other reasonable adjustments available, and a lot of those that are free on the market. So I'll pass across to you, Adam.
Thank you very much, Mairead. So hopefully you can see and hear me now, which is good. Been having a bit of a technological nightmare, which is always fantastic if you're about to do some live demos, but we'll see how they go. It may be that we'll have to swiftly move on from my piece. But I'm Adam, I'm the Innovation Consultant at AbilityNet, and I want to talk to you about assistive technology. So specifically, the assistive technology available to you right now, the assistive technology you might not even consider to be assistive technology. But first off, I want to start off with a question. And I would normally say one for the chat, but you haven't got access to that, so you can't do this one. But does anybody know the name Ralph Titor and what he was famous for, or what he is famous for? So Ralph Titor was a mechanical engineer and a prolific inventor. He had what people described as an incredible ability to visualize things in his mind. Titor was also blind, having lost his sight in his early childhood. Now, during World War II in the US, the speed limit was set at 35 miles an hour, and this was done in order to save tyre wear and limit petrol consumption. Now, the story goes that Titor, being somewhat well-heeled, so wealthy enough to warrant it, was being driven around by his lawyer. His lawyer, however, was somewhat heavy-footed, and he kept speeding up and then braking as soon as he hit the 35 miles an hour speed limit. Titor, being blind, was particularly sensitive to this motion, and he'd regularly end up getting travel sick. So he set his mind coming up with a solution to control the speed of the car. And the speederstat was born. Okay, so the name didn't stick, but I'm sure most of you will have heard of cruise control. So cruise control is an assistive technology. It was born as a result of addressing a difficulty faced as a direct result of a disability. But although it presented a specific barrier to somebody with a disability, it's an assistive technology that everybody can benefit from. And this is where we move into the notion of solve for one, extend to many. So what is assistive technology? I've taken this from gov.uk. So the phrase assistive technology is often used to describe products or systems that support and assist individuals with disabilities, restricted mobility, or other impairments to perform functions that might otherwise be difficult or impossible. And I think the phrase "or other impairments" is particularly important, as it kind of moves us away from a phrase that many of us have heard and probably said, or at least thought at some time in our lives, and that is, but nobody here is disabled. Disability, impairments, and barriers are not always permanent. They can be temporary and they can be situational. And so by making your content accessible, by educating yourselves in the sorts of adjustments widely and often freely available, or by ensuring adjustments and access to software and hardware can be requested or accessed by a workforce with as little friction as possible, you're going to be benefiting everyone. Now, I'm pretty sure most people in the audience will have experienced at least one of the situations on this graphic and will probably have used an assistive technology to address it. So this graphic is showing touch, see, hear and speak as impairment types. And then we have examples of permanent, temporary and situational in each of those categories. So we've got things like permanent touch impairment being one arm, a temporary touch impairment being arm injury, and a situational being a new parent. Same again with hearing. We have somebody who is deaf, somebody who has an ear infection as temporary, and somebody in a loud room, I'd say, with the Microsoft example is a bartender, which gives you some sort of idea of the Microsoft culture, I think. But yeah, their example of a situational hearing impairment is a bartender, but we might also think of things like busy trains, for those of you who remember those, or even at the opposite end of the spectrum, somewhere like a library, somewhere where you can't have a lot of noise, so you might be reliant on an assistive technology such as captioning. I'd also say, how many of you have set a kitchen timer on your Alexa because your hands were busy or messy or full? Or again, to go back to those captions, watching those captions on a commute was one I used to use quite a lot. Now, live demos. As I say, I've had a bit of a nightmare this morning with technology. So it may be that you are just going to witness an innovation consultant falling to pieces as the technology collapses around him. But we'll give it a go. It's what we're about. If it goes wrong, then it's the fault of the technology, not the individual. So we'll try and live that a little bit. So I'm going to focus on some of the inbuilt assistive technologies that many people overlook as a really good introduction to the sorts of adjustments you can make that are going to make a huge difference. So these tools can often be presented to employees as productivity tools, which can be used for employees struggling maybe with a diagnosis, or with admitting they might benefit from a bit of assistance. All of these tools are built in, so they don't need quotes and purchase orders and installation. They're available immediately. I will caveat that with saying that it does need something like the Microsoft 365 subscription service for some of the things that I'm going to show. But essentially, if you've got that, then they're there and ready to go. And again, if somebody discloses a difficulty, it may be you can just ask them, have you tried using one of the things that I'll show you? It may be that the inbuilt solution is enough to overcome that barrier, or it might be good enough to provide support for the transition until a full place assessment or something like access to work can kick in and be, they can be provided with actual specialist assistant software. And then my personal soapbox is that using free inbuilt software also enables an employee to find out if the solution works for them before you purchase a more expensive third-party solution. It empowers them to be able to say, this works for me, but only up to this point. This is the limitation that I've run up against. And that's going to help you with the justification for more expensive third-party software. So we're going to look at a little bit of speech-to-text software to begin with. I am going to use the Microsoft version, and just to prove the point that I'm having tech problems, as I move that up there, my other screen went completely blank. So we'll give this a go, oh no, it's back. Okay, brilliant. So here we have Microsoft. This is the online version. So this is Microsoft Word Online, and it has a dictate feature. There is one on the app version as well, same place, but it's just got a dictate button. And if I click that, hopefully my flat isn't going to burn down. And we'll try that again. If not, we'll move on to something else. There we go. Brilliant. Okay. So you should now see, hopefully, that as I begin talking, it's transcribing as I go. I did have that horrible moment there, as you could all have told, where it went wrong. So with this, you can do other things, like there are formatting. So anybody who used to use the old version of Microsoft's Dictate, it tended to be a bit word for word, a little bit hit and miss, or yeah, it's kind of being kind. So if I go new line, and it's gone to a new line. So finally, although there was an error there, select although, bold that. Select line. Select paragraph. Justify center. Undo. Justify center. Undo. Okay, right. Undo. So you can see it's an excellent version of a demo gone badly wrong. I am going to try a couple of other things. It does normally work really well. As I said, this is an example of tech failure extraordinaire. But you can do things like select extraordinaire. Select extraordinaire. Do you know what? I'm going to give up on this one. It's not the best of demos right now. I will say as well, with the dictate feature, it does help, for example, people who are neurodivergent, so people experiencing issues with things like words around things like dyslexia, conditions such as dyslexia. It will do things like phonemes, so those are words that sound the same, but are spelt differently. So it will, because now when it comes to understanding voices, it's packaging everything together and then deciding what that sentence should read in its context. It will pick out the right there. So if you said something like they're not sending their cat over there, are they? Which is the example that I've got that I'm loath to use right now. It would pick out the correct theirs. So there, and there being the examples. It has another nifty feature, which I'm going to give an attempt to, because I'm not going to give up on it quite yet. But one of the reasons I wanted to use the online version is it has a transcription feature. So you can upload an audio file, and I have one ready to go here, and it will transcribe that file and allow you to put it into the document itself. But while that's running, I'm going to switch over to Google. Because Google has its own inbuilt features, its own inbuilt dictation feature. So we're going to see if we can ruin this one for everyone as well. So it's under the tools, voice typing, and I can just click to start speaking. And again, it's reasonably accurate in terms of what it's actually transcribing for me. And I would say that was the same with the word thing. I'm, on a webinar, so I'm gabbling a little bit. It's probably having some issues with that. Gambling, interesting. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. So eventually it does kind of catch up a little bit, but you can see it's reasonably accurate with some fast speech. This will do things like new line, new paragraph, okay. Bold. If I now start speaking, it should be that it started to format it. New paragraph. And it's always good to start with a heading. Select paragraph. Apply heading 1. There we go. So it's applied, and it's now going to write over the top because I'm still recording. So it will do that sort of thing. It will also, although I keep doing things like this, so it's now going to write over the top of this, I believe. Let's switch that off for now. It will also do formatting like text color red. Undo. Undo. Right then, this has been a bit of a disaster on that front, I think. So yeah, in other demos that I've done with this software, it has worked almost flawlessly. Now, one of the things that I did also want to bring up is that, here we go. So we've just translated the transcript for the audio file that I just uploaded. It was a bit of Dr. Seuss, and you can now add that into the document. So it takes around the same time as it takes to speak it. Particularly useful if you've got a recording of a meeting or something like that, and it will try and identify individual voices within that meeting. So a really nice feature that's in the Word version. Now we were looking then at the Google version. It's a great bit of technology. As I say, that the actual transcription is reasonably accurate. I was probably trying to be a little too flashy and get it to do too many things there, and you could see the outcome. But one of the things that this speech engine does is it powers an app called Live Transcribe from Google, which is a really handy app. It's like subtitling your everyday life. So it's a free app on Android called Live Transcribe. You can download it and see how, when you're talking in regular conversation, it will actually transcribe the voices and the sounds around you. Fantastic. But all these things are basically based around what would be a typical voice pattern. Usually, it's trained on the white male kind of voice data set. So it has problems with female voices, or not problems, it's less accurate with female voices and accents. But also, when we're talking about disability, we might be thinking about things like atypical speech. And I just want to end my bit with a video from YouTube on their project Relate. And this is what you can do with that transcription. So the assistive technology that runs behind transcription, just a really nice example of how it can be used out in the wild and the difference that it can make to people. So.
Communication is a fundamental human need, and I think it's also a basic human right. I'm Audrey Lee, a brand manager at Google. More specifically, I'm a namer, and it's a lot of fun to say that I'm a professional namer. I have a type of muscular dystrophy that affects the way I speak. I have always loved making new friends, but when people can't understand me at first, they have trouble getting to know me. It's as if there's an invisible barrier between us. I believe technology can help bring down that barrier.
My name is Julie Catio. I'm a product manager at Google in the research team. Project Relate started in 2018 when we realized that our speech recognition technology could be improved to help people with speech impairments be better understood. Standard speech recognition doesn't always work as well for people with atypical speech because the algorithms have not been trained on samples of their speech. So we decided to create an app that would be custom trained on individuals' unique speech patterns.
We named the app Relate because of what it enables you to do.
To use the app, the first step is to record a set of phrases so it can get to know how you speak. The Relate app has 3 built-in features: Listen, Repeat, and Assistant. Listen transcribes everything you're saying in real time.
So I have a custom voice model now, and
Repeat repeats what you've just said in a clear computerized voice.
next thing I do, hot chocolate.
Hot chocolate.
Ah, gotcha.
Thank you.
Assistant connects directly with your Google Assistant.
Take a selfie.
Okay, get ready.
I hope I live to see the day when disabled people can move through the world and expect the same level of connection as everyone else has. I think Project Relate is bringing us closer to a better future.
So yeah, just a really nice example of the sorts of things that you can do with assistive technology when it works. So with that, I'm going to go for a long walk now and hand over to Lena.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you for your presentation. So hi, everyone. I'm going to, I work in BT as the Ergonomic Musculoskeletal and Wellbeing Specialist. And what I'm going to do today is talk about our approach to display screen assessment, which we started during the pandemic, right at the beginning. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Adam. Thank you. So risk around MSK health in the workplace is managed by a DSC assessment. And what we did was we took a proactive approach and developed content for a new DSC self-assessment that went beyond the regulatory requirements with a broader health and wellbeing overlay. And this was very much evidence-led, and factors that we included in the, I guess, the guidance that we put together was to try and reduce prolonged sitting and sedentary behavior, physical inactivity, looking at ergonomics and workstation setup, and taking into account people working in different workspaces and making that advice very much practical and principle-based. social isolation, so people working in different places, working away from their teams, and the impact this can have on people, and also stress. So the workplace can have a positive and a negative impact on people's MSK health. And we wanted to utilize a system that was already in place, so the DSC risk management system, to try and further highlight, educate and support good musculoskeletal health in the workplace, be it within the office or at home. And when it comes to DSC, there's a variety of ill health that have been associated with DSC use, along visual stress and, well, mental stress and visual fatigue, as well as MSDs. The risk associated with MSDs is relatively small, but when you take into account the amount of people that use DSC, that has a huge impact to people and in the workplace. Also take into account, we don't just use DSC in the workplace, we also use it at home. And there's a picture here that shows our new building in Birmingham, Snow Hill, and it has great building, great office environment. You can see loads of water there and biophilia. And what instantly strikes me when I look at this picture is the fact that people are working from their laptops, looking down and not plugging into the great monitors that they have in front of them. And they're not using their chairs to the best possible way to help encourage good musculoskeletal health. MSDs themselves are quite common and reoccurring in nature. And there's a risk of this developing into chronicity. Chronic pain is now more prevalent than it was 40 years ago, with most people reporting it between the ages of 40 and 50 years of age. And of those that do develop chronic pain, only 2/3 will recover. So we wanted to try and encourage really healthy behaviors early on and utilize our DSC assessment. So if we go on to the next page, please. So over the next 4 slides, I'm going to talk about, I guess, the different factors that fed into the evidence that's built the content for the DSC self-assessment. So starting off with musculoskeletal health in the workplace. Poor musculoskeletal health can affect people of all ages. And on the left, if we look at the stats here, this is from the Business in the Community Toolkit. 1 in 8 of the working age population report to having MSK. Employment rate for people who report MSK as their main health condition is 59.7%. And in 2010, claimants with MSK were more likely than those with other conditions to attribute their health conditions to work, and that was 36% relating it to work. So musculoskeletal health can have an impact on our physical activity levels. Equally, physical activity levels can have an impact on our musculoskeletal health. It's a two-way stream. WHO published some guidelines in 2020 in terms of what we should be achieving physical activity-wise. And it's more or less similar to what they published back in 2010, which was we should try and do at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic exercise or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity exercise, that we should try and do 2 strengthening sessions a week. And what they introduced for the first time is that we should try and minimize the sedentary time, and that this would help to have huge impacts on our health, help to improve our sleep, helps to maintain healthy weight, helps to manage stress, and helps to improve our quality of life. It also helps to reduce the impact of certain conditions like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, falls and depressions, joints and back pain, and certain types of cancers. But when we look at the actual figures in terms of what people are achieving, unfortunately, there's quite a bit of discrepancy. So around 1/4 of adults and 3/4 of adolescents do not meet the recommended requirements for aerobic physical activity, and 80% of the population don't carry out 2 strengthening sessions a week. On top of that, there unfortunately has not been much improvement over the last 2 decades in physical activity levels globally, and there continues to be differences across different demographics. Looking into a bit more in terms of sedentary behavior, increasing levels of physical inactivity have been linked to prevalence of non-communicable diseases. And this is not new. This information has been out for quite a while. Back in the 1950s, Transport for London did a study looking at bus drivers and bus conductors. And what they found was that the bus drivers were twice as likely to have a heart attack compared to bus conductors. And the only difference was that the bus drivers spent most of their working shift sitting, whereas the conductors were walking and moving around during their day. So we wanted to really get that message into our DSE self-assessment. So if we go on to the next slide, please, Adam. Thank you. The Health and Safety Executive carried out a large-scale study back in 2007 where they surveyed over 1,000 DSE users in organizations of different sizes over a 12-month period. And they looked at musculoskeletal-related symptoms. And what they found was that 73% of respondents reported one or more MSK-related symptoms. And in terms of the spread of this, 47% reported neck pain, 39% reported shoulder pain, and 37% reported back pain. Over half of the respondents reported head and or eye symptoms. Women generally reported more symptoms than men. And a large proportion, so 82%, took no time off work. But for those that did take time off work, those absences were related to headaches, back pain, neck pain. And as you can imagine, a higher prevalence of MSC symptoms were reported with increased computer time at work. The survey also looked at the occurrence of anxiety, depression, and distress amongst DSE users. And they found that this was much more common with younger respondents, and that those working for greater than 5 hours over their contracted hours had a higher frequency of symptoms. The same with anxiety, higher frequency of women reporting it than men. Distress is more common among those who worked more than 1 hour without a break. And anxiety and depression was more common for those who spend longer per week at their computer. If we move on to the next slide, please. EU OSHA, so the European Agency of Safety and Health at Work, have published a more recent study. They looked at research focusing on work-related MSDs between 2018 and 2021. Their qualitative study was in two parts. So they had a desk study and they had field work. The desk study looked at literature review of telework and analysis of its regulation across EU. And their field work consisted of semi-structured interviews included, which involved 48 employees over 18 companies. And what they found in terms of the evidence, psychological risks related to intense virtual communication and a higher prevalence of self-reported MSDs linked to sedentarism, poor ergonomic conditions, working long hours, and work-related stress. So very much similar to what the HSC report published. And also, if you think back to the last couple of years working at home and the intense, I guess, Zoom calls or Teams calls, we've really fed that into our DSE self-assessment to make sure that people are aware of the impact of that. And so that when they set up meetings, they were setting up meeting invites for 50 minutes or 25 minutes to encourage those regular breaks, not only for their mental health, but also for their activity to ensure that they're moving around. EU OSHA used the evidence from this study for various tools and publications that you can access. If you go onto their webpage, you can download loads of information that you can use yourself. They've also got great videos that you can use. So if we go on to the next slide, and we'll show the video, if that's okay. Thank you. Move on to the next slide. So the video really emphasizes it's great to have systems in place to ensure people have the right equipment, but at the same time, it's really important that people are provided with right guidance that enables them to use their equipment in a very much healthy and safe way for themselves, and that they have the understanding for that. Okay, so the last, I guess, piece of the jigsaw piece to the content for the new DSE self-assessment is information from Leesman. So Leesman look at workplace experience, and during the pandemic, they moved this across to remote working. And they've done several webinars over the last couple of years. And this is from their data collected back in 2020, where they looked at different setups people had at home. And what they found is that 37% had a dedicated workroom or office, 33% had a dedicated work area, but not a separate room, and 27% had non-specific home locations, so for example, dining table. And what they found are that the experience varied depending on the workstation setup, as you can imagine. So those that had their own dedicated workroom or office had the best experience. And those that had a non-specific home location, unfortunately, had a lower experience of home working. This also related into age groups. So generally, the younger population had a lower experience of working from home due to availability of guest workspace. And those are older generally tend to have a dedicated workroom or office, and so had a better experience. When they looked at the data, they also did further analysis to see where were the biggest variations when it came to experiences working from home. And these are the 4 statements that they came up with. So my home environment enables me to work productively. The physical settings I use when working from home are suitable for the work I do. When I work from home, I'm able to maintain a healthy work-life balance. And when I work from home, I feel connected to my colleagues. So we embedded a version of these statements into our self-assessment to highlight if there was not a great experience for the individual, for our colleagues, so that this could be discussed with their line managers to make sure that people were working to the best abilities and had a good work environment for them. Thank you. So if we move on to the next slide. So take into account all of this, we built this new self-assessment. So we obviously have a legal requirement, which we met, but then we went beyond that with the health and wellbeing overlay based on the evidence I've just gone through. And throughout the self-assessment, there's loads of guidance, and we also have videos on workstation chair setup. It's very much integrated from a user perspective, so people need to order standard equipment, they can do easily. Also links to a vast amount of resources that we have on our wellbeing portal. And it also links to Stream, which is our stress management tool. So if someone's experiencing stress, it opens up that dialogue between the employee and the line manager early on. And although the development of this content started off before the publication of the 2021 EU OSHA study, which I discussed earlier on, it was great to see that this aligned very closely with it. And we're going to be evaluating this with a different research project to see how much of an impact this has on people. So if we move on to the final slide, thank you. So the starting point for managing risk in the musculoskeletal risk in the workplace is our DSE self-assessment. And we've tried to make it very much interactive and practical for a variety of people. If risks are identified and people need further support, then there's a process set up where they can have an ergonomic assessment with our safety consultancy. Or for those that require more of a bespoke tailored workplace adjustments, they themselves know they can refer to the enable process where our assessments are carried out by AbilityNet. We also made sure that this was actually embedded into the self-assessment. So one of the sections within self-assessment is user health and well-being, and at the very top we highlight the enable process. If people do require further support for reasonable adjustments in the workplace, they are very much made aware early on. And that's, I guess, a whistle-stop overview of our DSE self-assessment that we have in place at BT. Thank you.
Ah, thanks. Excellent. Thanks so much, Lena, for sharing the information about what BT Group does towards employee wellbeing and health. So I'm sure you've all got a lot of questions you'd like to ask. So if you have a question, please fire away in the Q&A window. I don't know if we'll manage to cover everything right now. So any unanswered questions we'll capture and answer on our website in the next couple of days. So you'll be sent a link to access them. So we've had a few questions through. One question, is Relate available on the Play Store?
Not yet. It's currently in the US, Canada, and I think they're rolling it out in Australia as well. But yeah, it's a slow rollout, but it will be here so soon, I'm assured.
Okay. So a question that we've had earlier on was, do you have any advice or suggested ways to ask for and receive reasonable adjustments without making the conversation about disability or necessarily sharing the nature of the disability? So if this is one for you, Mairead.
That's a difficult one. Can you just repeat the question again?
Yeah, it's do you have any advice or suggested ways to ask for and receive reasonable adjustments without making the conversation about disability or necessarily sharing the nature of the disability?
Well, that is difficult because in order for you to get the reasonable adjustment you might need, it's probably something that you should be discussing with your line manager or HR. The only way you could talk about it without saying you're a disability is the effects that's having on your work without mentioning that it's a disability. But I'd always urge someone where possible to raise, and I know it's about the environment you're in and that culture within the organisation, but that's the best help you'll get. If you're finding that it's not something you can talk about, then it's probably best to talk to HR or your line manager about how you're not being able to do a particular piece of work to your best of your ability without a certain piece of assistive technology or a reasonable adjustment taking place. That is a difficult one, though.
Yeah. Okay. If there's anything that we think of in between, we could always put some extra advice on the website afterwards. Yeah. Just something that was mentioned earlier on. Somebody, Mustafa, mentioned he can find the dictate function in the online version, but not on the Word app. Where can he find it? Just to share that it's on the home ribbon, in case anybody else had that question.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the demo front, I'll try and record some of those and we'll make them available. Yeah, they're always on a live demo, but it's also about, getting people comfortable. We all try these things. It goes wrong for everybody, no matter how many times you practice it in a nice quiet room without gabbling through content. Then yeah, so I will try and make those available in a nice edited format.
Okay, and yeah, we can share those in the same place that you find this webinar recording. Yeah, great. A question from Zoe. Can you recommend any resources for guidance on reasonable adjustments for neurodivergencies, in particular OCD, anxiety, ADHD, dyspraxia?
I don't know if Adam knows any in particular for when he did assessments, but I know the people that have found it very useful with anxiety and dyspraxia is the Genius Within that I mentioned earlier. That's very useful. I mean, normally you would have an assessment for someone to tell you what you need, because sometimes it's quite individual. So a workplace assessment is good. Other than that, Adam, I would say maybe ring our help desk like Alex, who would be able to know a bit more, because there's lots of different things out there.
Yeah, and we've got some fact sheets on the websites and that sort of thing. But I'd also say, as far as that goes, and the questions before, if you focus on the barriers rather than the conditions, you're going to be in a better kind of frame there. So if you're rather than saying this person has dyslexia, therefore they will need A, B, and C, what you're actually saying is somebody's having difficulty reading. Is there anything that helps with that? And going from that point.
Great, thank you. A question for Lena from Harry. I was wondering in BT if you have a dedicated team in charge of reasonable adjustments and the DSE, or is it given to a team to manage?
It varies across BT itself, but generally we have a centre of expertise team, a health, safety and wellbeing team. But for reasonable adjustments, we make sure anyone that requires an assessment goes through the enable process, and it's AbilityNet who do our assessments for us. And then we put into place what the recommendations are. We have an accessibility practice catalogue, so we try and make sure that equipment that is recommended is aligned to our, our IT estate and easily accessible for people to put into their workplace. Yeah. But the DSC self-assessment, we really try to make it really user-friendly for people to get their equipment and advice and put them onto the correct pathway. Because I think sometimes that's the problem with workplaces, is there's so many things to navigate, it can get really frustrating. And so we really wanted to make this process as streamlined as possible for people so that they were on the right pathway earlier on, rather than having to navigate various pathways.
Okay, great, thank you. I think this is referring to a slide of yours, Mairead, earlier on. It says, my partner suffers from tinnitus, which is by nature a variable impairment. How is this condition classified in terms of the factors outlined in an early slide with regard to adjustments, e.g. environmental?
Well, I would say if that's something that would be a reasonable adjustment, because it's the noise around you. I mean, there are apps available that, there's something called tinnitus apps, maskers, sound pillows, but I think that's something that you could probably have help with through Access to Work and make an application for a grant. You can do that yourself. You don't have to go through your company, and then you could say to them that you've applied for a grant, and they could provide you with the reasonable adjustment. But I do think it's part of your environment, and it's something that will be covered.
Okay, and that leads on to another question from Catherine. She's interested in hearing more about Access to Work. Do you support employees in this process? And that's a question for AbilityNet and for Dina at BT.
Okay, so we support our own people through it, obviously, and we encourage them to use it. I mean, when we took someone on a few years ago, their grant amounted to £4,000 for equipment, travel, etc. So it is dependent on the size of the organisation. We don't support others. I mean, I don't mind talking people through it, but if you go on the government website, it's very comprehensive and they will tell you all about it. We also have a fact sheet on it as well on our website. So there's lots of information out there about it. If someone wants to talk to me about how I go through it and how you make a claim and how you get your money back, that sort of thing, then I'm happy to talk them through. But I would start off with the government website.
Okay, thank you. And at BT, we have a page dedicated to workplace adjustments, reasonable adjustments. And the first bit there's about enable process, which we try and signpost people through because it's much more structured and straightforward. And someone can get assessed quite quickly on with AbilityNet, and we get a report and then have those adjustments put in place. But we also have information on Access to Work because it is great. And I think, Mairead, how you mentioned before, they provide support for travel, where in those cases, Access to Work has come in brilliantly. But I guess it's knowing which one to go to, because what you do not want to end up with in BT is two different reports, which is a bit frustrating for our colleagues. So we try and make that information nice and clear to them.
Just looking at the time, I think we've got time for one very quick question, if you're okay to provide us a brief answer. Is there any guidance for organisations adopting hybrid working as part of a return to site, which may bring in barriers which have been absent throughout the pandemic? And that's from Sarah.
So hybrid working, yeah, I don't even know where to start with this. So in BT, we have a smart working policy. We've got a web page, which, I guess it's the guidance there that line managers need in terms of having those kind of conversations with their colleagues, because it's very much dependent on people's work tasks. It's dependent on where people are based. It's dependent on people's personal circumstances. And I guess we're going through that stage right now in terms of finding the right balance. And it's going to take time. Like it did in the beginning of the pandemic, it took time to figure out where you would want to work, what kind of setup you needed, what works for you, what doesn't work for you. We're all very much individuals. Same thing when it comes to work in the office. Getting that balance is quite hard. I know some companies have made it quite structured where people come in on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and then the following week they might change to Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But the idea of going into work is that you see your colleagues, because I think it's the connection that's important. We're social beings. So there's no point going into the office when none of your other team members are there, because you might as well work from home. Equally with, it's down to your work tasks. With Leesman, they found that people who want to do focused work, they prefer doing focused work at home. Whereas when they want to do innovative, creative work, they want to be in the office environment. But equally with BT, with our new building, so I'm based at our new headquarters in Aldgate, we've got great workspaces. So I could book a room to do focused work, but also we could book a room to do creative work. I think it's getting there with your team members. But I think having advice and guidance in terms of encourage those conversations, because I think you need to have those conversations with your line managers and you need to have conversations with your team to get a balance. And I think we're still looking at a good few months before we get that that balance, to be fair.
And I think my advice would be, don't tell them what we're going to do, but get input from everybody and understand what their fears are about going back into the office and what works for them. And don't set down rules to start, but have that conversation, open conversation. And I mean, each organisation is different and you can't have one rule for all. I mean, we're going back into the office this week, actually, in our new London office. And it was very much about having conversation with the teams involved and about having a rota system, who's going in when. And we did have some people who were very nervous about going back into the office. So we've started a system where they'll go back 1 day a week, and then they'll build that up to 2 days a week in June. And then anybody who decides that that's not going to work for them, then we'll go through the flexible working application route.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Mairead, Adam and Lena. Some excellent discussion points. So yeah, we'll cover any questions that weren't answered on our website later this week. So just to let you know, we also run some fantastic online training sessions on digital accessibility, and you can find out more about those at /training. And you can use the 10% discount code, which is AbilityNet webinar 10, and group discount bookings are also available. So do get in contact if that's of interest. Coming up, we have courses later this week on accessibility evaluations. And then next week, Adam speaking on our Don't Disable Me series about mental health barriers in the workplace. Then later on that week, accessibility for designers. And then the following week, visual barriers and digital disability awareness with our colleague Adi Latif, and how to use a screen reader for accessibility testing. And then just finally, please do sign up for our newsletter at /newsletter. We'll send you a link to sign up shortly so you can keep up to date with the latest in workplace accessibility news. And our next free webinar is on the 24th of May, and that's about how to bring empathy into your workplace. You can register for that very soon. It's not quite live yet, but that will be available at /empathy-webinar. So thanks again, Lena, Mairead, Adam, everybody that's joined us, and we'll be in touch with you very soon. Please do fill out the feedback form that will appear at the end of the webinar. Thanks again. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.